I am very pleased to welcome Anders Porsborg Smith, who is part of the global leadership team of Boston Consulting Group. He's part of the energy practice and leads BCG's energy scenarios and environmental markets work. Also joining us, we have Jonathan Goldberg, who's the CEO and founder of Carbon Direct, which is a CO2 management company, and he's joining us, I believe, from New York. So I hope we can speak to them now. This is a fireside discussion between the two of them. Good evening, good afternoon to you, good morning to you, wherever you are in the world. I'm just here to kind of make sure that the ball keeps rolling and to start the conversation off. Jonathan and Anders, both Carbon Direct and BCG have taken an approach of selective partnerships in the way that you're building your businesses. What are your thoughts then on ecosystem building effectively for driving CDR? Anders, perhaps I can start with you.
Yeah, I guess we're preaching to the converted. I've been listening in on the conversation previously, and I think for the room as a whole, I think we all see the importance of CDR. I think across most scenarios, right, and not even in the basic scenarios that we're following, where we're talking a 2-degree path, but definitely also in the distribution of scenarios, right, so recognizing some of the uncertainty, removals represent a significant hedge for the scenarios that we have in question. And when, at least in BCG, we see this as very much a necessity to even get close to you could say, one of the more ambitious degree pathways. Well, we're talking 2-degree, or even, you could say, even more so a 1.5-degree pathway. So the recognition that we need to scale the CDR, you could say volume quite quickly, quite rapidly, will require, you could say, an enablement both across what we are considering financing, of course, access to financing. We need to recognize also that we are in a very short situation of CDRs where most of the supply is already committed on the demand side, and we drastically need to scale this at an exponential rate. Also recognizing that of course a lot of the technologies that are required to scale this are at the early stage of development, right, and will require quite a bit of R&D spending to meet our demands, and of course as we move into the space, we need a supply chain that can deliver all of these elements as well. So in our, you could say, philosophy and how we're thinking about this from a business perspective, I mean, ecosystems are absolutely essential. We have tried to do that, right, both with of course signing up with Carbon Direct, which is one of the primary leaders in the space of removals, right, but also when we're looking, of course, with strong developers like Climeworks, and of course working with and alongside financial institutions, working with and alongside buyers as part of our first mover coalition. So generally, you could say the ecosystem is there to help do this and facilitate the progress of growth at a pace that is, you could say, for most unreal, and becomes you could say, even on paper, even in a technical consideration, very, very challenging, right? And in that sense, ecosystems are what we at least believe as you could say the primary unlock to make this happen.
Jonathan, what about your perspective? Carbon Direct has an interdisciplinary approach to its efforts. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, no, thank you. And I thought, Anders described it quite well. I think when we look at interdisciplinary efforts, and I think it relates to the partnership approach as well, we see clients that have a need across different types of carbon management and across different types of carbon removal. When we look at interdisciplinary, we want to have expertise, we want to have talent, we want to have scientific expertise across the different ranges of carbon removal so that people can understand the opportunities that are out there. They can weigh different durability of storage mechanisms. They can understand if a certain pathway costs a certain amount, why it costs a certain amount, and what the pathway is to lower that. And that requires people with all sorts of different disciplines to actually evaluate the landscape. And I guess the last point on the partnerships and ecosystem building is, people. I know it's come up in the conference today, but we need more talent. So, we look to bring on folks with backgrounds in nature-based solutions and engineered forms, et cetera. Because when you look at the scale of CDR that's needed over time, we're just understaffed across every different range, and hopefully we can play a role in growing that.
But how much does it affect, Jonathan, the way that you think about partnering? Like, what's your process?
Yeah, so I think it makes us more, I guess if, as a firm, we look at both investing and also working with our clients on carbon management. I think when you look at the range of things that need to be built, take the financing side for a second. financial firms and investment firms generally don't offer all types of capital. So you may have a venture capitalist, a growth equity capital, and then a project finance provider, as was discussed on the last panel. I think given how early the CDR industry is, but how quickly it needs to grow, I think it allows for more close partnerships across different types of financing than you might see in other areas. Because I think if you're a successful growth equity investor, you know that you need project finance to follow your investment to actually scale the opportunity. If you're a venture capitalist, you know you need growth equity capital to help provide that next round of financing. So I think it helps accelerate given the understanding of the need here.
And Anders, BCG's built a full-fledged climate offering. How does CDR fit into this, and what role do these partnerships provide?
Yeah, I think when we're looking at our offering, obviously we have a very strict hierarchy of how we advising clients, right? So first of all, we need to avoid, then reduce, and then we need to the extent possible, right, offset in value chain, out of value chain. The recognition that you could say a removal of offsetting credits and removals in general play a critical role in climate strategy across sectors, particularly hard to abate sectors, I think is one that has really, you could say, come quite strongly into the year. And now very much fits as part of our core offering. I think from a partnerships perspective, as Jonathan was saying, right? I mean, this is a space where we are talking a lot of new technologies that you could say the technology and technological understanding is quite challenging, right? And requires special both on the technical understanding, but also you could say evolutions, right? As the market evolves. Similarly, when we're looking at the policies, we're looking at you could say what does it take to make these solutions bankable? How do we treat them from an accounting perspective? How do they fit into our broader operating model in terms of governance? How do we risk manage these positions? Right, the climate exposure and the liabilities become quite vast, given the price tag and the general, you could say, uncertainty that we see. And all of these things, I think, are basically where at least we have adapted our offering. And of course, in areas where we see that there are great companies out there that have specific dimensions that where at least we would like to we think there's a synergy from partnering, but where we would also like to partner with them, are areas where we very much focus our partnering strategy, and that both means for the likes of Carbon Direct. It also, of course, means what we're doing with Climeworks, but similarly what we've been doing with, for example, GFMA. And other, you could say, either industry organizations, right, or similar type of participants and stakeholders. And we try, as I mentioned before as well, to bring everyone together, right, to get the best out of this, right, and make, you could say, these interfaces as frictionless as possible. But generally, the focus is very much, where do we think we can make a difference, right, and how can we help our clients have the biggest impact possible, and how does partnerships and partnering in general fit a role in that regard.
Thank you very much. I'm going to rely now on a question that we had a little bit earlier from online that really kind of hits the nail on the head. The nature of competition in innovation and the IP space can kind of sometimes stifle open sharing of learnings and best practices. What strategies do you think, or how impactful do you think that these collaborations that you have kind of help overcome these difficulties, overcome these hurdles? Jonathan?
That's a good question. I mean, I think, a lot of the folks on our team we're very happy have sort of an academic and scientific background. So I think it's just consistent with our makeup and philosophy to try to share as much as we can. So, as a firm, we're frequently publishing, whether it's sort of overviews on the status of the carbon market, or we've published twice now criteria on high quality carbon removal that we worked with the Microsoft folks on. I think it's sort of just core to the offering of what you're doing to try to move the market forward. That said, we do understand that there are, private companies like Climeworks and others that have specific technologies that require capital to put in and investments, and their investors are going to want to earn a return on that. So I think that there's a fair role for, commercial strategies and IP that's really, it's not divorced, and frankly, it's not in conflict to trying to get the market to move to a higher standard, trying to grow it. And when we look at the end state for carbon removal, it's so much bigger than we are today that I think some of the the more petty, if you will, discrepancies on commercial competition now are kind of missing the big picture. The big picture is we need a lot more of this.
Is that the same for you, Anders? I mean, is it kind of, it doesn't get away in the in the way of the big picture?
No, I think John hits the nail on the head, right? When we're talking about the overall size of this market, I mean, I think even when I'm looking at some of the IPCC scenarios and other scenarios, I mean, we, at least at BCG, in many situations are much more bullish than what is being published out there on the role of removals. We see that's very much as I mentioned before, right, a hedge in some of the worst climate-related pathways that might come up as future scenarios. So in that regards, I mean, we think, of course, that the profit pool in this market is going to be astronomical, right? When we're thinking about, you could say, how do we ensure that removals becomes a critical part of the solution? I think that's very much at the heart of what we imagine as well. That said, we are relying on, of course, a lot of new money coming in to fund this R&D, right, and to make sure that we lower costs, that we scale production lines, to scale supply chains, and that requires, of course, the different parts of the value chain to be profitable, right, for the actors that are coming in and funding this with risk capital. And in that regards, of course, there is a need for IP protection, and there is a need for these companies to be rewarded. But I think that it is in the natural dynamics of the market that actually there's synergies in cross-learnings, there's synergies in cross-collaboration, right? And I think the market itself is seeing that. We're seeing that already now with a lot of actors that are coming together, right, and sharing learning, sharing R&D, as well as of course, also potentially in future consolidation scenarios. I also think that when we're looking at, particularly within BCG, I mean, we have a lot of discussions, particularly between our different industry practices, right? Whether we're talking industrial goods, we're talking energy, whether we're talking fast-moving consumer goods or other types of industries, we generally see that there's extremely good learnings across industries that can be applied, right? And it's in everyone's interest to do so. So generally, I think some of these things will happen naturally, right? As we start to see that there is the rational role for cooperation and collaboration. Given the wider, you could say, gain that we see in the bigger picture.
And so you think in the future there will be more collaboration in the future then? Yes.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, and maybe a final word to you, Jonathan. How do you see the future here? What is your advice maybe to our audience today?
Oh, wow. No, I think a lot of the trends that we just discussed, I want people to come away with. I think the big one is the need for multiple different sort of types of people, scientific backing, capital to be put to work, different types of capital to be put to work, all need to sort of cohesively come together to help build the ecosystem out. And I guess the last point, I think Anders did a very good job talking about different partnerships. I think it's important in the engineered carbon removal community, if you will, to kind of understand that, we think nature-based solutions are also going to play a big part. There's so much of all of these things that need to be done. There's really no chance for just direct air capture, just bioenergy, just nature-based solutions, just soil carbon to sort of solve any of these things. So working on carbon removal in the context of a robust voluntary carbon market and hopefully regulatory carbon market that has high quality standards for each of the different categories is really, really important. Eli mentioned that a little bit at the end of his talk. So I hope folks work on that.
Mm-hmm. And Anders, what's your key takeaway for our audience today?
No, I think as John mentioned, many of the important ones here. I mean, for me, of course, that we keep believing in the potential of this, right? That we're talking an astronomical growth rate for the industry and the sector as a whole. That we also understand that the issues that we as an industry can come together to. I think there was a good point made on standardization, policy alignment, right, and getting even cross regional and cross jurisdictional alignment on policies, right, and of course, lastly, that these partnerships and ecosystems are critical to unlock things at the pace that we require, right. It's not even getting to the growth, right. It's also within the time frame that we're looking at. So hopefully we can all come together and help have that impact, right. That's going to be critical for our climate as we move forward.
Thank you very much indeed, Anders Porsborg Smith and Jonathan Goldberg. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.